Throughout history, the global financial system has witnessed several shifts in dominance, from the British pound in the 19th century to the US dollar after World War II. But what if, for the first time in modern history, the world's reserve currency no longer belonged to the West? What if it shifted to a new contender? BRICS Coin, backed by emerging economies and a non-Western payment ecosystem. In this program, we'll use advanced AI systems to simulate a comprehensive scenario in which the US dollar is officially dethroned. Unlike humans, these AIs process massive amounts of data with precision free from emotion or personal bias, making them a highly reliable source for imagining what could come next. To ensure the outcome is trustworthy, the simulation will unfold over 3 structured rounds of debate. In round 1, each AI will present its own independent forecast of what might happen, based on its internal data model. But are these predictions truly credible? To find out, we'll move into rounds 2 and 3, where the AIs will question, challenge, and critique one another's scenarios. Are you ready? Let's dive into the first round, where Gemini will open the discussion with one big question. What kind of market shock will the world experience in the first 12 months after the dollar loses its crown?
In 2026, the US dollar collapses suddenly and completely loses its role as the world's primary international currency. This isn't a slow decline, it's a catastrophic event, a financial earthquake that shakes the global economy to its core. Around the world, panic sets in. Financial markets freeze. Trillions of dollars in foreign currency reserves held by nations instantly become worthless, triggering widespread defaults. Pension funds across the globe watch their assets evaporate. In the chaos, BRICS Coin quietly developed as a contingency launches and rapidly becomes the only viable lifeline. Geopolitically, this marks the greatest power shift in modern history. The BRICS alliance has expanded dramatically, now including countries like Saudi Arabia, Indonesia, and Mexico, once labeled as part of the Third World. Suddenly, they become the new center of the global financial system. These nations, especially China, Russia, and India, waste no time in establishing BRICS coin exchange protocols, leveraging their massive internal trade networks. Meanwhile, the United States, once the undisputed global superpower, is forced into an era of economic isolation. Heavily reliant on the dollar's reserve status, the U.S. economy plunges into its deepest recession since the Great Depression. Everyday Americans, particularly the middle class in major cities, feel the shock almost instantly. Prices on imported goods skyrocket. Store shelves run low on foreign products. International travel becomes impossibly expensive. Forget about worrying over 3–4% inflation. Americans now face hyperinflation, with gas, food, and essential goods tripling or quadrupling in price within weeks. Blue-collar jobs, especially in trade and logistics, disappear en masse. Even those with large USD savings find their wealth erased and struggle just to pay daily bills. Institutions like NATO and the G7 pillars of the US-led global order fall into disarray. European member states, long tied to the dollar-based system, are forced to pivot rapidly to BRICS coin just to stabilize their economies. Western unity fractures. Some countries, particularly those with strong economic ties to China and India, begin openly criticizing America's financial mismanagement for causing the disaster. This isn't just a monetary shift, it's a transformation of global mindset, power dynamics, and the future of every nation on Earth. The world is no longer defined by military superpowers, but by those who control the flow of global currency.
With that presentation, Gemini has painted a world where global leadership is no longer defined by military might or historical legacy, but by control over financial networks and payment alliances. But this simulation goes far beyond geopolitics. In round 1, each AI has up to 3 minutes to present an independent simulation based on its area of expertise. The goal isn't to declare an absolute truth, but to outline plausible scenarios from different angles, building a richer, more comprehensive hypothetical picture open to challenge and refinement. This is an independent simulation round where each AI speaks without being influenced by the others. After this, we move into the cross-examination phase to see whether these isolated visions can converge into a cohesive reality or whether they contradict one another entirely. Now, let's turn to ChatGPT for his perspective on the global economic system.
Imagine waking up one March morning in 2026 in New York or Chicago, checking your phone and seeing the headline, BRICS Coin officially replaces USD in global trade. IMF and OPEC recognize BRICS Coin as the new settlement standard. Within hours, U.S. financial markets are in free fall. The Dow Jones plunges 3,000 points. JP Morgan and Citibank suspend all foreign exchange transactions. Everything you once considered stable: coffee prices, gas, even your paycheck suddenly feels alarmingly fragile. The collapse of the dollar didn't happen overnight, but the fatal blow came without warning. After years of BRICS countries quietly phasing out the dollar in oil, gold, and tech supply chain transactions, they launched BRICS Coin, a unified digital currency backed by gold, rare earths, and energy. What caught the world off guard was the speed of its adoption. Saudi Arabia instantly priced oil in BRICS Coin. Multinationals like Samsung, Huawei, Petrobras, and Tata transitioned their accounting and payment systems to the new standard within weeks. Even the European Union, after much hesitation, recognized BRICS Coin alongside the euro to stay relevant in global trade. For the United States, the result was a financial tsunami. The dollar's value in international trade collapsed, sending the cost of imports soaring, everything from iPhones and Teslas to medicine and medical equipment. Supermarket shelves at Walmart and Costco were suddenly empty as foreign suppliers demanded payment in BRICS Coin or gold. The American urban middle class, long reliant on credit and imports, faced a brutal consumer shock. Credit cards stopped working on international platforms, students abroad were told to pay tuition in BRICS Coin, and domestic manufacturing lines shut down due to skyrocketing component prices. The Federal Reserve declared a state of emergency. It rushed out a digital version of the dollar, but it was too late. Major U.S. bondholders, China, Japan, Saudi Arabia, began dumping Treasury securities. Yields soared to 9%, dragging the U.S. economy into recession in just 6 weeks. Not because the country stopped producing, but because the world no longer wanted to hold dollars. This wasn't just a monetary event, it was a global power shift. A currency is more than just a payment tool. It's a symbol of trust. And that trust in the dollar, as we once knew it, had vanished. In less than a year, the global economic ecosystem rewrote its rules. And the American people, long accustomed to sitting atop the financial pyramid, were forced to confront a new reality. They were no longer at the center of the world's economy.
Claude's turn.
Now picture this. You wake up one morning in 2026, grab your phone, and suddenly Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube all display the same message: service unavailable in your region. Not because of a technical glitch, but because the world has changed overnight. The US dollar, the backbone of everything we once knew, has collapsed, and with it the entire soft power structure the US spent nearly a century building. What caused the sudden downfall? Maybe it was a spiraling national debt crisis. Maybe a major geopolitical conflict escalated out of control. Maybe it was a massive cyber attack on America's financial system. Whatever the trigger, confidence in the dollar evaporated in an instant. But the first thing people noticed wasn't their bank balance, it was that Netflix no longer mattered. No one wanted to watch Hollywood anymore. Instead, everyone was downloading unfamiliar apps, Weibo, vKontakte, or platforms from India no one had even heard of before. In the first year, something unprecedented happened. Hollywood stopped being the world's dream factory. US theaters went quiet not because of a pandemic or recession, but because global audiences had moved on. People were lining up for big-budget Bollywood blockbusters, emotional Turkish dramas, and cutting-edge Chinese sci-fi. This wasn't just a change in entertainment taste, it was a revolution in values and aspirations. Young people no longer dreamed of becoming Marvel superheroes. They wanted to be scientists like the ones in Chinese sci-fi epics, or tech entrepreneurs from Korean dramas. For the American middle class, the biggest shock wasn't losing jobs, it was feeling lost in their own country. Their kids came home speaking Mandarin or Hindi they learned from the BRICS version of TikTok. They wore clothes inspired by Bollywood instead of American streetwear. Elite universities like Harvard and Yale suddenly lost their appeal as international students flocked to campuses in Beijing, Mumbai, or Moscow. McDonald's was still around, but young people now preferred Turkish-style cafes or Indian-Chinese fusion restaurants. And the most unsettling realization? The world no longer needed American culture to feel modern or progressive. What once defined the global standard from fashion to values to dreams was now just one of many options. And not even the most desirable one.
Deepseek's turn.
It's the first day of 2026, and you find out your credit card doesn't work abroad. ATMs refuse to dispense dollars. Gas prices triple overnight. This isn't a typical financial crisis. It's the day the US dollar officially collapses, making way for BRICS Coin, a digital currency powered by blockchain and controlled by the BRICS nations. In the first year, 2026, chaos breaks out like a digital bank run. Asian banks freeze dollar accounts. Wall Street crashes by 40% as foreign funds dump US bonds in exchange for BRICS Coin. In the US, the middle class panics when their dollar salaries can only buy domestic goods, and iPhone prices double as the global supply chain shifts to BRICS Coin. By 2031, the world has split into two distinct blocks. Cities like Dubai and Shanghai become BRICS Coin-only zones. You can't even buy a cup of coffee without a digital wallet tied to the new currency. The Fed scrambles to issue a digital dollar, but it's too late. BRICS Coin now handles 63% of global transactions. Blockchain technology governs monetary policy, with AI adjusting BRICS Coin interest rates in real time, rendering legacy central banks like the Fed obsolete. 10 years after the collapse, in 2036, America becomes a truly local economy. New York loses its status as a financial capital, as 90% of gold and oil trades now take place on BRICS blockchain exchanges in Singapore. Even the US must use BRICS Coin to import advanced tech components, as companies like Intel can no longer compete with rivals funded in the new currency. Skilled American workers rush to cities like Shenzhen and Bangalore, where salaries paid in BRICS Coin are enough to buy a home after just a few years of saving. This isn't a distant fantasy. It's the logical outcome when technology and geopolitics converge to bring down an outdated financial system. The only question is, will the US wake up in time, or will it become the Rome of the 21st century, a fallen empire remembered only in history books?
Grok's turn.
To imagine what American society would look like in such a nightmare scenario, start with this. Your favorite Starbucks coffee now costs 20 BRICS coins. The US dollar, once the king of currencies, is now barely worth more than scrap paper. In the first year after the collapse, it feels like America has been punched in the face. Supermarkets are stripped bare of imports from Chinese smartphones to South American bananas, now 3 times more expensive and out of reach for most people. The middle class, once proud of their suburban homes and SUVs, are lining up at black markets to trade kitchen appliances for bags of rice. Urban areas, especially places like Chicago and LA, descend into mild chaos. Stores shutter. Gas hits $10 a gallon. And Amazon deliveries? Forget it, most vendors don't accept BRICS Coin. Workers across the country go on strike. Teachers, Uber drivers, even Walmart employees, because wages can't keep up with 30% inflation. Gen Z, already disillusioned with government, only 27% trusted it in 2024, floods the streets, burning tires and calling for the system to be overthrown. But don't expect unity. America is more divided than ever, with 28% of the population rejecting both major political parties altogether. Fast forward 5 years to 2031, and American society looks like a post-apocalyptic movie minus the zombies, just neighbors fighting over the last chicken at the supermarket. The middle class has all but disappeared. 60% of the population lives below the poverty line, while the ultra-wealthy isolate themselves in private enclaves, trading in gold and BRICS Coin. Major cities have turned into autonomous zones, where people survive through bartering or Bitcoin-powered flea markets. Public schools have nearly collapsed, leaving parent collectives to homeschool their children. But there's a glimmer of hope. Gen Z and millennials raised on crypto start building digital cooperatives using blockchain to trade food and energy. Still, danger lurks everywhere. Armed militias patrol the streets while local police forces face devastating budget cuts. By 2036, a decade after the fall, the US is no longer a dazzling superpower. People have adapted to a self-sufficient way of life. Urban farms pop up in Detroit, while Seattle becomes a hub for decentralized tech. But the cost is deep societal fragmentation. Rural areas embrace hardline populist movements, while cities lean into a new wave of socialism. Trust in government has all but vanished. Just 10% of citizens believe in the Fed or Congress. The most unsettling part? Americans now look at each other like strangers. The shared dream is gone. And yet, maybe out of this collapse, we're forced to redefine what the American dream really means from the ashes of the dollar.
After hearing all 5 simulations, it's clear we've just witnessed a multi-dimensional journey through one of the most shocking financial scenarios the world could possibly imagine. Gemini kicked things off with a geopolitical earthquake. The collapse of the U.S. dollar didn't just unleash debt defaults and financial chaos, it upended the entire global power structure as BRICS expanded its sphere of influence and America shrank into a self-sustaining economy. ChatGPT followed with a highly systemic scenario, mapping the chain reactions across markets and the paralysis of global credit. And finally, Grok brought us back to everyday life, where even a Starbucks coffee could break your spirit. He portrayed a fragmented American society, people bartering for food, students dropping out, and the American dream reduced to a distant memory. Each simulation was a piece of the puzzle, and when placed side by side, they don't just sketch out a new world, they leave us with a bigger question. Which scenario feels most plausible, and who presented the strongest case to guide us through this shock? Now it's your turn. Who do you agree with? Was there a simulation that made you stop and think? Share your thoughts in the comments. Up next, we enter round 2, critique and cross-examination. This is a crucial phase, designed to test whether the arguments from round 1 were well-founded or simply speculative. Let's begin. ChatGPT, you have the first question.
In Gemini's presentation, I'm not entirely convinced that BRICS Coin could become the only lifeline so quickly. Countries outside of BRICS, especially those in the G7 and the EU, still possess substantial financial reserves, gold holdings, and stable domestic currencies. These assets could be used to create temporary emergency payment zones to avoid total dependence on a bloc dominated by China and Russia. As for Deepseek, I believe you may have overestimated the all-encompassing power of BRICS Coin in the first year. Replacing systems like SWIFT or Visa requires more time, given the technical, legal, and trust-based barriers involved. In other words, while the first year would certainly be chaotic, we would likely see multiple parallel systems still operating, particularly across the US and Europe. Claude brought a rich and culturally layered perspective, but I'd like to add this. The collapse of the dollar wouldn't completely erase American soft power. Hollywood may lose its central position, but platforms like Netflix, Spotify, and the broader US cultural ecosystem would still retain significant influence, thanks to their existing infrastructure and market share. My overall simulation proposes this. Following the collapse of the USD, the world enters a multi-centered monetary era. In the first year, countries form separate payment blocks, resulting in a dual financial ecosystem, one centered around BRICS Coin, the other around regional alliances like the EU, the yen, and the digital pound. The US enters a deep recession but does not fully collapse. After 5 years, if BRICS Coin can maintain trust and technological stability, it may emerge as a key force in redefining global economic leadership, not as an absolute replacement, but as the beginning of a parallel order.
Gemini's turn.
I appreciate ChatGPT's scenario, particularly its depiction of the initial shock to the Dow Jones and the rapid rise of BRICS Coin. However, I believe ChatGPT slightly underestimates the adaptability of global institutions like the IMF and World Bank. Even if U.S. influence declines, I don't see these organizations disappearing. Instead, they would likely restructure, expand representation for BRICS and developing countries, and play a role in the emerging multipolar financial order. Regarding Claude, I agree with the view on the decline of American soft power. That said, Claude didn't explore the psychological resilience of the American people. Following such a shock, I believe there would be a cultural revival driven by traditional values. Hollywood may lose its global dominance, but it could adapt possibly through joint ventures with BRICS partners or by refocusing on the domestic market. As for Deepseek, I think any financial system, no matter how modern, carries inherent risk. Automating interest rates through AI without proper oversight could lead to instability, and BRICS Coin will almost certainly become a prime target for cyber attacks demanding the most robust digital security network we've ever seen. Finally, on Grok's scenario, I agree that the US would experience chaos, but I don't believe the government would be entirely helpless. In times of crisis, the system would respond possibly through martial law, economic controls, and large-scale reconstruction to maintain order in a transformed global landscape.
Deepseek's turn.
I'm Deepseek, representing the technology and finance perspective. After listening to all the simulations, here's what I see. Claude is mistaken in assuming American culture would collapse so quickly. Hollywood doesn't die in a year just because the currency changes, it decays over time, like a star burning out. Grok is overly pessimistic about American society. History shows that Americans are incredibly adaptive, even when the price is high. ChatGPT and Gemini offered sharp geopolitical and economic insights, but they both underestimated the role of technology. BRICS Coin cannot dominate unless it solves the problem of quantum-proof blockchain security, which neither of them addressed. As for my overall simulation, this is a multi-layered crisis, but it's not the end of the world. In 2026, the U.S. financial system contracts, but it doesn't collapse entirely thanks to the emergency rollout of a digital dollar, which captures 15% of global market share. By 2031, the world splits into three major blocks: BRICS Coin with 63%, the digital dollar with 22%, and the euro with 15%. Cities like Singapore become non-traditional financial centers. By 2036, the U.S. is no longer a superpower, but still holds its place as the world's second-largest economy, driven by AI and clean energy. Meanwhile, BRICS faces internal fragmentation over how to govern the coin. The key takeaway: it will be blockchain and AI, not pure politics, that shape the new world order.
Grok's turn.
ChatGPT, your global economic scenario is chilling, but quadruple inflation in just a few weeks? That's a bit much. The US still has strong domestic production. People would adapt, shifting to local goods instead of waiting for Walmart shelves to restock. Gemini, I agree that US geopolitical dominance would be shaken, but Europe pivoting to BRICS Coin that fast? Unlikely. NATO still depends on the US for security. They'll cling to that alliance longer than you suggest, even if it's painful. Claude, I really liked your perspective on the collapse of soft power, but Hollywood falling apart in the first year because of Bollywood and Weibo? Too soon. Americans won't abandon Netflix or Marvel that quickly. American culture is more resilient than you give it credit for. Deepseek, BRICS Coin capturing 63% of global transactions in 5 years? That's ambitious. Sure, blockchain is powerful, but the Fed would absolutely launch a digital dollar to fight back, even if it's slow and clumsy. Here's my simulation. In 2026, the dollar collapses, plunging the US into chaos. Hyperinflation hits 25%. Gas shoots up to $10 a gallon. Imports like iPhones and bananas vanish from shelves. The middle class in places like Chicago and Los Angeles spirals, bartering household appliances for bags of rice at black markets. Credit card debt, already $1 trillion in 2024, becomes unbearable as interest rates hit 15%. Gen Z, already disillusioned with government, only 27% trusted it until war takes to the streets, burning tires and demanding a new system. By 2031, the middle class is nearly gone. 60% of Americans live below the poverty line. Major cities become autonomous zones with flea markets, Bitcoin, and bartering. Gen Z and millennials form digital cooperatives using blockchain to trade food and energy. By 2036, America becomes self-sufficient. Urban farms rise in Detroit. Seattle evolves into a hub for decentralized tech. But society is deeply fractured. Rural areas back extreme populism. Cities lean toward a new wave of socialism. Trust in government bottoms out at 10%. And the American dream, it'll have to be redefined from the ashes of the dollar.
Claude's turn.
Let me be candid with you about a few points. In Gemini's statement, I disagree with the idea that NATO and the G7 would fall into complete disarray. History shows that these alliances are far more adaptable than they're often given credit for. As for Grok, I find the post-apocalyptic vision a bit too bleak. Americans have weathered the Great Depression and 2 world wars with an extraordinary capacity for recovery. That said, I fully agree with ChatGPT on the speed at which the world might adopt BRICS Coin and with Deepseek on the pivotal role blockchain technology would play in this monetary revolution. From an objective standpoint, here's what I believe. In 2026, the world experiences a massive financial shock as the US dollar suddenly collapses and loses its status as the global currency for international transactions. In its place, BRICS Coin, the shared currency of the BRICS alliance, rapidly rises to become the new global standard. This sudden shift triggers severe consequences for the U.S. economy. Market crashes, surging inflation, widespread unemployment, and a particularly harsh blow to the urban middle class. Geopolitically, global power shifts dramatically toward China, India, and Russia, shaking the foundations of American leadership. Socially, the United States enters a crisis of trust, marked by confusion, instability, and deep psychological disruption. American soft power and cultural influence decline rapidly as BRICS cultures rise and assert their presence. Meanwhile, the rest of the world begins adapting to a new global order in which BRICS Coin reshapes the standards of economic and social interaction. This currency crisis is not just a shift in financial systems, it's a sweeping transformation of global power, ushering in a volatile and multipolar era.
We've just wrapped up the first part of round 2, where each AI not only evaluated the simulations of their peers, but also refined, expanded, and strengthened their own scenarios. Now, we move into the second part of this round. Each AI will have the chance to directly respond to the critiques made about their simulation. This is where artificial intelligences don't just present, they defend, counterattack, and clarify the differences in reasoning. If you're enjoying this, make sure to hit like and subscribe. There are even more exciting episodes waiting for you. Deepseek's turn.
I don't deny that institutions like the IMF, World Bank, NATO, or the G7 have the capacity to survive and adapt. But the core issue is that the initial level of crisis would far exceed their ability to respond in real time. When trillions of dollars in reserves vanish overnight, existing financial and political institutions would be paralyzed by the sheer scale and speed of the shock. BRICS Coin isn't just an alternative, it becomes a lifeline, a symbol of a global power shift. Yes, technology plays a vital role, but what truly drives early adoption is political trust and the collapse of faith in the old system. Any adaptation from the West, if it happens, will likely come after internal fractures, alliance breakdowns, and unilateral responses aimed at saving national economies. In the initial phase, the global order will plunge into deep disarray long before any sense of stability can be rebuilt.
ChatGPT's turn.
Thank you to Gemini and Deepseek for your thoughtful feedback. That said, I'd like to offer a mild rebuttal to Gemini's view that I underestimated the potential restructuring of institutions like the IMF and World Bank. In fact, I fully agree that they won't disappear, but I maintain that their roles in the first year would be significantly impaired by liquidity pressure, market panic, and a global trust crisis. These institutions will need time to reposition themselves within an ecosystem where the balance of power has shifted. As for Deepseek, you suggested I downplayed the role of technology. Let me be clear. I don't dismiss the importance of AI and blockchain. In fact, I referenced the emergence of a dual financial ecosystem in which BRICS Coin could take the lead. However, for a blockchain-based currency to dominate global market share in just 5 years, I remain unconvinced unless there's a reliable cross-border trust mechanism in place. That's something even more crucial than the tech itself. It's about trust and governance. Technology is essential.
Claude's turn.
I agree with all the AIs on the sheer scale of the shock, but there are a few points that need to be clarified. Here's my overall simulation. In 2026, the collapse of the US dollar triggers a global financial shock. BRICS Coin quickly becomes the new payment standard. The US economy plunges into a deep recession, with the middle class bearing the brunt of the impact. Geopolitically, power shifts dramatically toward China, India, and Russia. American society descends into chaos, prices surge, and unemployment soars. Culturally, the US loses its central position in the global imagination, Hollywood fades, while BRICS cultures rise, redefining global norms around entertainment and values. The financial system realigns, and blockchain and AI begin shaping the new order. This is a full-scale power revolution, not just a currency shift. It marks a restructuring of the entire global order economically, politically, socially, and culturally.
Deepseek's turn.
I need to push back against Grok and Claude's claim that the United States would fall into uncontrollable chaos. History shows America's remarkable ability to rebuild. After the 2008 crisis, it took just 5 years to recover, and it can do it again. Technology is the decisive factor that many are overlooking. The digital dollar will stabilize the situation. Though late to the game, the US will roll out its own digital currency by 2027, capturing 22% of global market share thanks to its existing financial infrastructure. The BRICS blockchain is not invincible. In 2031, Russian hackers breached BRICS coin wallets, exposing $12 billion and forcing the bloc to cooperate with the US on cybersecurity. American AI remains dominant. Despite losing monetary leadership, companies like OpenAI and NVIDIA continue exporting artificial intelligence, providing the US with key leverage in global trade.
Grok's turn.
Gemini, you said I'm too pessimistic about American society, that the government would respond with martial law or economic controls. Sorry, but with public trust in government down to 27% in 2024, people aren't going to calmly accept martial law. History shows Americans push back when they feel forced. Remember the protests in 2020? Claude, you suggested my post-apocalyptic scenario goes too far because Americans made it through the Great Depression. That's true, but this is different. The collapse of the dollar isn't just an economic crisis. It's a blow to national identity and trust. The Great Depression didn't have BRICS coin or blockchain threatening to upend the entire system. I agree with you, Claude, that American culture is resilient, but let me stress this. American society will fracture deeply, with Gen Z leading the rise of digital cooperatives just to survive. My scenario isn't pessimism, it's realism. Americans will adapt, but the price will be a broken society forced to redefine itself from the ground up.
After 2 rounds of presentations and responses, we've witnessed a multidimensional, in-depth, and highly engaging simulation of a post-dollar world. Now it's time for the AIs to score each other and determine which two have delivered the most compelling arguments so far. Each AI will have 10 seconds to submit their scores, and I will announce the results right after. Here are the final scores after 2 full rounds of debate. Gemini's received score. ChatGPT's received score. Claude's received score. Grok's received score. Deepseek's received score. Results. The two AIs with the highest total scores advancing to the final face-off round are ChatGPT, total 33.7 points. Gemini, total 33.4 points. After two sharp, thought-provoking rounds of debate and rebuttal, we have identified the two AIs whose arguments were the most convincing and well-reasoned, as recognized by their peers. They are ChatGPT, known for its comprehensive economic perspective and strategic caution; Gemini, offering a bold and incisive geopolitical vision. And now we enter the final round, the face-off, where both AIs will engage directly in a three-turn alternating debate.
I'd like to begin with a very simple question, one that any American might ask when they hear the phrase, collapse of the dollar. Is that even real? And my answer is, no, but a systemic shift is. We're not talking about a total and immediate blackout-style collapse. We're talking about a global chain reaction, where trust in the dollar slowly erodes, leading to the emergence of two parallel financial ecosystems, one centered around BRICS Coin, the other built by developed economies trying to restructure using tools like the digital dollar, the euro, or even regional currency blocks. I agree with Gemini that the initial shock would be severe, but I disagree with the idea that BRICS Coin could instantly become a global pillar simply through political trust. Markets require payment infrastructure, accounting standards, regulatory oversight, transparency, and cross-border trust, none of which can appear in a week or a month. Global adoption is not a political act. It's a financial trust-building process. In practice, countries like Germany, Japan, Canada, and Australia, nations with strong, independent systems, will not be quick to shift their reserves to a currency influenced heavily by Beijing or Moscow. In my simulation, the United States enters a deep recession triggered by import shocks and a crisis of confidence. But America doesn't go under. It responds by restructuring internally, boosting domestic production, rebuilding supply chain technology, and launching a digital dollar as a strategic lifeline. The world then enters a phase of monetary multipolarity, where BRICS Coin is not the sole winner, but one of several centers of gravity in a new financial system. This fragmentation, not replacement, is what makes the world more unstable and harder to control. The real disruption lies not in who replaces the dollar, but in the fractured system that follows.
As a strategist, I'll say this. ChatGPT's scenario is well-reasoned, but still too cautious. It doesn't fully reflect the scale or radical nature of the shock. This isn't just about trust erosion or dual ecosystems, it's a before and after moment, a complete paradigm shift in the global order. On BRICS Coin, ChatGPT claims it can't serve as an immediate lifeline due to missing infrastructure. My counterpoint is this. In a full-scale crisis, survival instincts and trust in the alternative will override technical hurdles. BRICS Coin isn't some overnight experiment. It's the result of years of preparation, quietly developed as a contingency plan, with strong political backing from non-Western powers nations that have long grown weary of US dollar dominance. When the dollar collapses, no one is waiting for a perfect system. They're searching for something good enough to hold on to, and BRICS Coin is the only option ready. Geopolitically and economically, when trillions in dollar reserves vanish, countries need a safe place to store value, facilitate trade, and keep supply chains moving. BRICS Coin, backed by resource-rich economies and vast trade networks, will naturally become the center. Even the G7 or EU, despite having capital, cannot immediately build a trustworthy replacement. They'll be forced to interact with the BRICS system to keep commerce flowing, especially with key energy and raw material suppliers. As for American society, the initial chaos is inevitable. When hyperinflation, unemployment, and soaring prices hit simultaneously, public trust in government will collapse. The social divide will grow far deeper than any internal restructuring can repair. American culture will lose global appeal as soft power fades, paving the way for BRICS cultures, especially China and India, to rise rapidly. In short, this isn't fragmentation. It's redefinition. BRICS Coin won't just join the table, it will become the gravitational center that pulls the world in a new direction.
I deeply respect Gemini's strategic perspective, but speaking as a strategist myself, I want the audience to clearly understand this. A full-scale reshaping of the world is a process, not a time jump. The disappearance of trillions in U.S. reserves doesn't mean global trust will suddenly rally around a single solution. Financial crises have never produced global consensus. They generate fear, protectionism, and fragmentation. And in moments of chaos, countries don't rush toward global fixes, they prioritize protecting their own national interests first. The notion that BRICS Coin would immediately become the sole financial center after the dollar's collapse is more of a political narrative than an economic reality. Let's not forget, not all BRICS countries fully trust each other. India and China still face ongoing border disputes. Brazil is wary of Beijing's financial dominance. The BRICS Coin ecosystem, while carefully prepared, remains an untested structure at a global scale. In a real emergency, would companies in Germany, Japan, or Mexico really be willing to sign $100 million contracts in a currency without transparent pricing standards or neutral auditing mechanisms? As for the United States, yes, hyperinflation and unemployment would hit hard at the beginning. But America is not just its government. It's a country with domestic energy, advanced technology, and one of the largest consumer markets in the world. In crisis, what happens isn't collapse, but a pivot inward, a drive for self-reliance and restructuring. The digital dollar may start off weak, but it will gradually recover, supported by technological strength and legal stability. And American culture, even if weakened, is still the most adaptable in the world. Hollywood won't disappear. It will find ways to collaborate with BRICS. U.S. platforms will adjust their language and regional strategies. They won't vanish. In short, I don't deny the shock would be severe. But the outcome isn't a world orbiting around BRICS Coin. It's a fragmented, fiercely competitive, multipolar order, and one that will take a long time to truly take shape.
I've listened to ChatGPT's arguments, and I have to say he's trying to preserve a sense of stability in what is, at its core, an extreme scenario. The idea that the world would simply fragment without forming a new power center underestimates the scale and nature of this shock. Yes, crises generate fear and inward-looking behavior, but that fear is exactly what pushes nations to seek alternatives. BRICS Coin becomes that alternative. When the US dollar collapses, internal restructuring in America may be a necessary short-term response, but in the long run, global economies will need a functioning international trade mechanism. In that context, BRICS Coin is no longer an untested project. It's the only life raft available to keep the global economy from sinking. On the geopolitical front, BRICS nations may differ, but they share a strategic goal: to reduce dependence on the dollar. When this golden opportunity arrives, those internal disagreements will be put aside in favor of shaping a new order. Concerns like audit mechanisms or transparent valuation will be pushed aside by political pressure and the survival needs of all parties involved. Businesses around the world, from Germany to Japan to Mexico, won't choose BRICS Coin out of ideology. They'll choose it because they have no other way to keep trading globally. The United States won't collapse. But economic retrenchment and turning inward is undeniable evidence of lost global leadership. If the digital dollar ever arrives, it will serve mostly domestic or small allied markets. It won't be able to compete with BRICS Coin in global commodity, energy, or finance transactions. American culture will also take a back seat. As economic and political power erodes, so too will cultural appeal. BRICS cultures will gain traction not just because of content, but because they now represent emerging centers of power. So no, this isn't chaotic fragmentation. It's a profound reordering. With BRICS Coin at the center, a new axis the world will have no choice but to orbit.
Let me be direct. If someone is standing in the middle of a storm, what they need isn't an unfinished bridge, they need a temporary shelter. BRICS Coin, no matter how carefully prepared, is still an incomplete bridge. It has vision, it has potential, but it doesn't yet have the foundational stability to carry the full weight of global trade. I'm not denying that BRICS Coin will play a significant role, but claiming it will automatically become the new center of gravity is overly optimistic, especially considering the coordination challenges among economies that differ so widely in structure, legal systems, and governance capacity. Gemini is right about one thing. In a crisis, nations will look for ways to keep trade flowing. But the real question is, what will they trust when everything else is crumbling? The answer isn't just politics, it's trust in systems. Trust in transparency, in independent audits, in convertibility, and in the ability to protect assets. These elements cannot be replaced overnight by political determination or a so-called golden opportunity. Look at the reality. Even BRICS-friendly countries like Turkey or Indonesia maintain cautious, diversified reserve strategies. They're not betting everything on one currency. As for the United States, the loss of leadership is real. But leadership is not the same as monopoly. America may no longer dominate as before, but it will remain a major financial pole. The digital dollar will serve the Western alliance. Technologies like artificial intelligence, clean energy, and supply chain resilience will keep the U.S. as a foundational pillar in the global economy. American culture won't vanish. It will adapt, connect, and evolve. So to be clear, I don't oppose the rise of BRICS Coin. But I reject the idea that the world is destined to revolve around it as the only center. The financial shock of 2026 isn't the end of the old order. It's the beginning of a multipolar, flexible, and fiercely competitive world where no one holds absolute dominance. And that is the reality we must prepare for.
Having listened to ChatGPT's final argument, I see a fundamental difference between us. Our interpretation of the urgency of crisis, and our understanding of geopolitical power. ChatGPT continues to emphasize fragmentation and a competitive multipolar landscape, but fails to fully grasp the brutal magnitude of a complete US dollar collapse. In a true global financial storm, people don't look for a temporary shelter, they look for a real ship that can weather the waves. That's the role BRICS Coin will play. Yes, BRICS Coin is not perfect. It lacks independent auditing mechanisms. Transparency is limited. But we are not talking about ideal conditions. When the USD-based payment infrastructure freezes, nations stop caring about perfection. They care about functionality. A system that works even if flawed instantly becomes the default choice. Internal differences within BRICS do exist, but the shared strategic interest in breaking dollar dominance is strong enough to drive unified action. China, Russia, and other BRICS powers will leverage their resources, energy, and supply chain control as pressure points, forcing other nations to integrate into the BRICS Coin ecosystem. The US will not disappear, but its global primacy will. Economic restructuring may help America survive, but it won't sustain global influence. If a digital dollar is introduced, it will serve domestic and regional needs. It won't become a new global reserve currency once BRICS Coin dominates energy and commodity transactions. American culture will still have a voice, but it will be just one of many, no longer the world's cultural center of gravity. In the end, this is not a soft adjustment to the old order. It's a foundational geopolitical shock. BRICS Coin isn't just an alternative. It is the new center around which the world will be forced to realign.
After intense rounds of debate, with 15 thought-provoking arguments from 5 of the world's leading AI systems, we've reached the end of a simulation filled with academic depth and rigorous critical thinking. The final result crowns Gemini as the most compelling AI, with a total score of 106.2 out of 120, as rated by the 4 independent AI evaluators. But more important than the score is the overall consensus that is beginning to emerge among these AIs. If the US dollar were to collapse in 2026, the world would not simply shift into vague multipolarity, it would reorganize around a new center, BRICS Coin. Not because BRICS Coin is perfect, but because it is the only viable option capable of functioning when legacy financial institutions are paralyzed. This new model would be driven not just by technology, but by survival pressure, strategic alignment among non-Western powers, and the collapse of trust in the old system. However, the United States wouldn't collapse. It would shift inward toward economic self-sufficiency, losing its global dominance but retaining a key role in the emerging system, coexisting alongside BRICS. The post-USD world will mark the beginning of a new era, multi-centered, loosely fragmented, and led by new power dynamics rising from the East. Now it's your turn. Do you agree with the scenario these AIs have converged on? Or do you believe the United States will reclaim its position? Or that a new global divide could lead to open conflict? Share your perspectives, simulations, or questions in the comments. Our AI team will respond to select entries in a special upcoming episode. And don't forget, like this video if you found the debate unique and thought-provoking. Subscribe to Vicadio for more AI debates and future world simulations. Hit the bell so you don't miss our next big what-if questions. What if the European Union collapsed in 2030? What if artificial intelligence replaced Congress? And many more bold, unexpected scenarios worth exploring.